In 1992, a powerful actor exposed his intimate parts and committed an explicit act right in the faces of two young women on a movie set. Audiences once praised this as the peak of extreme method acting, but the truth behind it is chilling. The terror in their eyes was a brilliant performance, extracted from a highly toxic, degrading environment. It was real-life depravity weaponized against vulnerable co-stars, sanctioned by a director obsessed with raw shock. Ultimately, is this a cinematic masterpiece or a horrifying, legitimized form of psychological abuse? 1992, New York independent cinema operated on a dangerous currency. Shock value ruled the production studios. Directors and actors actively competed to push the limits of censorship. They rejected the polished, safe environment of mainstream Hollywood, bringing the unfiltered, chaotic violence of the streets directly to the theater screen. The industry labeled this movement as brave and uncompromising. Bad Lieutenant embodied this extreme culture perfectly. The pursuit of gritty, street-level authenticity erased standard workplace safety boundaries. Film sets transformed into unregulated stress zones. The demand for visceral reactions replaced the need for actual acting technique. Shock became the ultimate goal. The camera demanded raw, uncomfortable reality. The physical setup of the most infamous scene in this movie dictates total control. Harvey Keitel portrays a corrupt, heavily addicted police officer. He pulls over a vehicle. Two young women occupy the front seats. The physical reality of this location creates an immediate, inescapable trap. A car interior functions as a confined steel cage. The doors remain shut, the windows define the perimeter. The women possess zero physical mobility. Exiting the vehicle requires opening a door into an active street scene and ruining the camera take. They are physically boxed in. The production lights surround the vehicle, blinding the occupants. The camera lens points directly through the windshield. Every angle is covered. Every reaction is monitored. The environment isolates the two women from the outside world. They are sitting targets waiting for the scene to begin. They expect a standard exchange of dialogue, expecting to perform their job as professional actresses. Keitel approaches the driver's side window. He wears the official, fully detailed uniform of the New York Police Department. The uniform inherently projects authority. It carries the badge, the radio, and the visual weight of the law, demanding immediate civilian compliance. Society conditions individuals to freeze and obey the uniform. Keitel leverages this fictional authority before speaking a single word. The women inside the vehicle hold the industry status of supporting cast and background extras. The Hollywood hierarchy places lesser-known actors at the bottom of the power structure. They earn minimal daily wages. They lack the elite union power of principal stars. They possess no leverage to dispute the actions of a leading man. They stand on the set as highly vulnerable assets. Keitel holds all the power. The women hold none. Keitel breaches every known professional, moral, and legal boundary. He unzips his trousers. He exposes his genitals. He executes full frontal nudity on a public street. He presses his naked anatomy directly against the glass of the car window. The physical distance between his exposed body and the faces of the young women is reduced to mere inches. He does not step back. He escalates the violation. He initiates an active, graphic sexual act. He masturbates directly in their line of sight, maintaining aggressive eye contact while performing the act. The physical exposure accompanies a violent, unhinged verbal attack. Keitel screams at the women through the open window. He utilizes graphic, degrading terminology. He orders the young women to verbally instruct him on how to perform oral sex. He forces them into a graphic sexual role play, demanding their active participation in his public degradation. The scene does not break the law on paper, but it transitions into an active, documented act of severe psychological violence. This tactic constitutes visual terrorism. Keitel utilizes his own anatomy as an instrument of domination. He forces the women into visual captivity. Closing their eyes ruins the camera shot. Halting the scene angers the crew and costs the studio money. The victims bear the heavy professional pressure to stay in character, keep their eyes open, and endure the visual degradation to secure their paychecks. The power of the camera forces them to witness the abuse. They cannot look away without facing professional retaliation. The footage of this scene exists today. The camera captures the faces of the two women in high definition. They register sheer, unfiltered panic. They exhibit raw biological disgust. Their eyes widen in genuine horror. Their bodies physically recoil from the window. Decades of male-dominated film criticism falsely labeled this dynamic as a triumph of extreme method acting. The truth is much darker. The women are acting. They are delivering a terrifyingly authentic performance of sheer panic, but the industry completely ignored the cruel psychological toll required to capture it. Keitel hijacked the set. He forced young actresses to process his graphic sexual exposure in real time, under the guise of an edgy screenplay. He inflicted real-world discomfort on his co-workers, converting their forced emotional labor into his own cinematic currency. The horror of this scene escalates far beyond a hostile workplace incident. It reveals a calculated predatory trap born from toxic cinematic practices. To understand how a leading man felt empowered to commit such a blatant violation, we must look at the directorial environment cultivated on that set. Independent films of that era often thrived on a dangerous concept called guerrilla filmmaking. It meant throwing out the rule book, embracing chaos, and prioritizing intense spontaneity over structured safety. Director Abel Ferrara championed this lawless approach. The script, co-written by Ferrara and Zoe Lund, was already a dark, disturbing exploration of corruption, but the written word was not enough for the production. Ferrara encouraged a highly volatile, unpredictable atmosphere. He incentivized his actors to improvise, to push boundaries, to shock their scene partners in pursuit of an authentic reaction. This directorial philosophy provides a dangerous blank check to powerful actors. When a director explicitly demands unscripted chaos, the boundary between a creative acting choice and a legal violation vanishes. Keitel knew he operated in a zone of absolute immunity. He knew that if he crossed the line of basic human decency, the director would not yell cut to reprimand him. Ferrara would keep the cameras rolling to capture the carnage. Keitel exploited this unregulated environment to ambush the two women in the vehicle. Professional actors review scripts together. They block out physical movements. They discuss intimate or distressing scenes in advance to establish mutual consent. Keitel bypassed this fundamental industry protocol. He weaponized the element of surprise. He understood that warning the actresses would give them time to prepare, time to build an emotional shield, or time to refuse the scene entirely. The horror of this scene escalates because it was completely premeditated. Keitel and Ferrara did not ambush these women by ignoring the script. They used the script as a bulletproof shield to legitimize their depravity. When actresses sign on to a gritty, independent film, they expect difficult subject matter. But the industry uses these contracts to trap vulnerable talent in highly degrading scenarios. Ferrara and Keitel treated the supporting actresses not as respected collaborators, but as disposable props designed to absorb the shock waves of extreme method acting. The production ceased to be a safe laboratory for fiction. It transformed into a playground for unchecked male ego. The public consumes cinema with a fundamental assumption. Audiences believe film productions operate under the strict guidance of professional ethics. They assume every spoken line and every physical action originates from a mutually agreed upon artistic vision. This assumption provides a psychological safety net. It separates fiction from reality. The production of Bad Lieutenant destroyed this safety net. The movie released in theaters represents a profound betrayal of workplace trust. When actors sign onto a gritty, independent film, they expect difficult subject matter. They expect to perform challenging material. But signing a contract to portray a victim in a script does not equal consenting to an actual unsimulated sexual ambush on set. The line between acting out a disturbing scenario and actually being victimized by one relies entirely on communication and consent. Harvey Keitel and Abel Ferrara shattered that line. They treated the supporting actresses not as human collaborators, but as disposable props designed to absorb the shockwaves of Keitel's performance. The production ceased to be a safe laboratory for fiction. It transformed into a playground for unchecked male ego. Standard Hollywood protocols dictate a specific response to an out-of-control lead actor. A responsible director halts production. A responsible producer issues a formal warning. The studio shuts down the set to prevent legal liability and protect the crew. Director Abel Ferrara ignored every single safety protocol. Ferrara observed his lead actor crossing the line into non-consensual territory. He witnessed the erratic, aggressive improvisation. Ferrara did not intervene to protect the cast. He made a conscious predatory decision. He weaponized Keitel's boundary-breaking behavior. Ferrara instituted a covert policy of moral apathy. He transformed a professional movie set into a psychological hazard zone. The camera crew received unethical instructions from the director. Their job was to capture the grit no matter the human cost. They kept the heavy 35mm lenses focused on the car, recording the genuine distress of the women. The crew operated under a toxic allegiance to the director's vision. They prioritized the cinematic aesthetic over basic human decency. This unscripted, highly distressing footage went straight into the editing room. Film editing inherently involves shaping reality. Editors cut and splice footage to create a cohesive story. Ferrara used the editing suite to perform a moral laundering operation. He took an incident of severe workplace harassment and stitched it into a profound character study. He used pacing, music, and sequence arrangement to give Keitel's unscripted assault the illusion of a brilliant, planned performance. He applied the structure of a fictional narrative to disguise the reality of his predatory improvisation. The final cut of the film presents a controlled artistic vision, but the raw environment that produced it was completely uncontrolled. This deception exposes the highly toxic culture of the American cult classic scene in the 1990s. Directors in this gritty genre prioritize their artistic reputation over basic morality. They worshipped at the altar of raw authenticity. They believed traditional filmmaking was sterile. They sought a dangerous, unpredictable edge. Ferrara capitalized on his lead actor's volatile choices to achieve that edge. He commodified the genuine fear of the supporting cast. He assigned a commercial dollar value to real human suffering. Ferrara did not view Keitel's extreme behavior as a professional liability. He viewed the chaos as free, highly valuable production value. He transformed real-world misconduct into a cinematic asset. The resulting film blurs the line between a narrative feature and a documentary of workplace abuse. It is a fabricated reality constructed by a director willing to exploit the vulnerable people on his set. The entire production ecosystem of an independent film relies on trust. Actors perform vulnerable acts based on a mutual agreement with the director. The script serves as the legal and artistic contract. Ferrara and Keitel shredded that contract. They operated a rogue production. The concept of consent vanished. When an actress signs a release form, she consents to the actions detailed in the screenplay. She does not consent to a surprise sexual exposure. Ferrara bypassed ethical consent through pure directorial negligence. He exploited the chaotic atmosphere of a low-budget shoot to mask the violation. The American film industry harbors a deep obsession with the tormented artist archetype. The culture romanticizes suffering. It equates extreme personal dysfunction with artistic genius. Ferrara fed directly into this toxic mythology. He recognized Keitel's volatile, unscripted choices not as a crisis requiring intervention, but as a goldmine for independent cinema. He understood the market value of authentic misery. The 1990s indie film market demanded transgressive content. Audiences sought out movies that defied mainstream Hollywood sanitation. Ferrara supplied that demand by crossing the line from director to enabler. He did not simulate transgression. He documented it and sold it. This methodology sets a terrifying precedent for workplace safety in the entertainment sector. A film set is a professional workplace subject to strict labor laws. The director functions as the primary manager. Ferrara abdicated his managerial responsibility. He actively encouraged a hazardous environment. Keitel's actions went unchecked because the ultimate authority figure on set silently approved of the chaos. The camera validated the dysfunction. It created a dangerous feedback loop of escalating depravity. The more extreme Keitel behaved, the more profound footage Ferrara acquired for his narrative. The critical reception of the film further empowered this directorial malpractice. Prominent film critics championed Bad Lieutenant. They wrote extensive analyses parsing the religious symbolism and the themes of redemption. They treated the film as a profound exploration of Catholic guilt. They ignored the unethical mechanics of its creation. The critical establishment validated Ferrara's methods. They granted him the title of an auteur. An auteur is a director considered to be the undisputed author of a film. The industry grants auteurs massive creative leeway. Ferrara used the auteur label to immunize himself against ethical scrutiny. The critical praise effectively silenced any questions regarding the consent and safety of the women involved in the production. The legacy of this chaotic filming operation stains the history of American independent cinema. It reveals the dark underbelly of the art at all costs mentality. The film stands as undeniable proof that the pursuit of a gritty, realistic aesthetic often relies on the outright exploitation of human beings. Ferrara built his directorial reputation on a foundation of ethical negligence, dangerous improvisation, and the silent suffering of his supporting cast. The true horror of Bad Lieutenant resides entirely behind the camera. For decades, the cinematic establishment protected this scene with a powerful, impenetrable phrase. They called it method acting. The public accepted this label without question. Critics published extensive reviews praising Harvey Keitel. They worshipped his commitment to the craft. The media presented a calculated hypothesis to the audience. This hypothesis framed Keitel as a sacrificing cinematic genius. The narrative claimed he intentionally crossed the line of basic decency to elicit a genuine, usable reaction from his co-stars. It framed the physical exposure and the verbal assault as a tactical, professional acting choice. The industry sold the idea that Keitel abandoned his own ego to serve the gritty, uncompromising reality of the film. The public bought the lie. Audiences believed they were witnessing the pinnacle of American performance art. They believed the terror on screen was the result of a master actor pushing the boundaries of his profession. The term method acting became an ultimate shield. It deflected all criticism. It silenced all ethical questions. It transformed a blatant display of sexual harassment into a celebrated cultural milestone. We must define actual method acting to dismantle this dangerous myth. True method acting originates from strict, disciplined theatrical training. It requires an actor to draw upon personal emotions and memories to connect with a fictional character. It demands intense psychological labor and emotional vulnerability. However, true method acting also requires an unbreakable professional boundary. A trained professional steps into the emotional state of a character, performs the scene, and steps out. It involves immense personal control. True technique never dictates the non-consensual violation of a scene partner. It never authorizes workplace sexual harassment. It never requires physical exposure to non-consenting individuals. Keitel displayed zero professional control. He utilized zero ethical theatrical technique. The actions captured on screen do not represent a disciplined actor making a bold, collaborative choice. They represent an individual weaponizing his elite status. He did not use his imagination to create terror. He used his actual anatomy. The established hypothesis of calculated genius falls apart under basic scrutiny. Keitel did not carefully plan a psychological tactic to elevate a safe scene. He leaned into his most toxic impulses, forcing his co-stars to endure a highly inappropriate, psychologically damaging environment. The industry often mistakes this frantic, uncomfortable energy for brilliant intensity. In reality, it is the visible byproduct of a leading man who knows he can do whatever he wants without consequence. His eyes dart erratically. His physical movements lack the precision of a choreographed performance. His aggression is unmodulated and dangerous. He was not simulating the depravity of a corrupt police officer. He was actively exhibiting his own real-time depravity. A disciplined actor can stop an intense performance the moment a safety issue arises, or when a co-star is genuinely distressed. An actor obsessed with shock value ignores the distress. Keitel did not plan a collaborative acting choice. He simply unleashed his darkest, most unfiltered impulses on a public street. The American film industry transformed method acting into a toxic religion. This religion provides a convenient, impenetrable shield for abusive men. Hollywood utilizes the label of method acting as a universal get-out-of-jail-free card. It functions as a legal and social immunity idol exclusively for powerful A-list male stars. Consider the inherent hypocrisy of this dynamic. An ordinary citizen exposing his genitals and demanding sexual acts in a public setting faces immediate arrest. The legal system categorizes this behavior as a felony sex crime. The perpetrator faces prison time and a permanent spot on a registry. A Hollywood actor commits the exact same physical act on a movie set, and the industry nominates him for prestigious awards. The label of indie art magically sanitizes the crime. The critical establishment categorized Keitel's assault as bravery. They rewarded his lack of professional boundaries. They created a culture where extreme workplace hostility is not just tolerated, but actively celebrated as the mark of a true, serious artist. This dynamic exposes a massive gender disparity in the American entertainment complex. The method, acting defense, is exclusively a male privilege. The industry allows men to leverage their physical presence, break set rules, and terrorize coworkers under the guise of artistic dedication. A female actor attempting to use method acting to justify physical assault or sexual exposure would face immediate termination. She would be blacklisted. She would be labeled unstable and uninsurable. The industry reserves the title of volatile genius solely for men. Women are expected to absorb the volatility and maintain absolute professionalism. This myth inflicts a secondary, lasting trauma on the victims. The public and the critics essentially gaslight the women involved in the scene. They force the victims to swallow a horrifying, revised narrative of their own abuse. The industry tells these young actresses that their abuser is a brilliant artist. It tells them their genuine terror was merely a necessary ingredient for a cinematic masterpiece. It rebrands their biological panic as a successful artistic collaboration. Calling this assault method acting is the ultimate insult to the victim's intelligence and humanity. It erases the reality of the crime. It shifts the focus onto the male aggressor's supposedly brilliant mind. The women are reduced to disposable props used to demonstrate Keitel's commitment. They endure the lifelong psychological damage of the abuse, and Keitel receives the standing ovation. We must interrogate the core pathology of this specific actor archetype. The serious American male actor often suffers from extreme narcissism. Keitel operated under a dangerous delusional framework. He likely believed his unhinged, abusive behavior constituted a profound artistic gift to the production. This represents deep narcissistic abuse. The aggressor inflicts trauma and genuinely expects gratitude for the raw material he provided. He views his own biological rudeness as a cinematic triumph. He substituted actual theatrical skill with brute force shock value. True acting requires the ability to generate authentic emotion through imagination, empathy, and practiced technique. Relying on actual sexual exposure to generate a reaction is the ultimate proof of a lazy, untalented approach to a scene. It requires zero skill, zero training, and zero talent to terrify a subordinate by pulling down your pants. It is the most creatively bankrupt tactic an actor can employ. It represents a total failure of the acting craft. The American cult classic scene championed this failure. Directors and audiences fed off this brand of transgression. They confused cruelty with authenticity. They believed that if a scene felt deeply uncomfortable, it automatically qualified as high art. This cultural mindset provided the perfect breeding ground for predators. It allowed actors to disguise their worst illegal impulses as profound character work. Keitel understood this cultural loophole. He exploited it perfectly. He knew the indie film community would protect his deviance as long as the final footage looked sufficiently gritty. The public must actively reject the method acting defense. It is a fabricated public relations term designed to excuse the inexcusable. It exists to protect the financial investments of the studios. It shields the reputations of volatile, highly profitable stars. The audience is complicit every time they praise a performance built on the non-consensual suffering of a coworker. We must separate the art from the abuse. When the art requires abuse to exist, the art is invalid. The footage from 1992 does not belong in an acting masterclass. It belongs in a legal textbook detailing the explicit mechanics of workplace sexual harassment. Keitel did not sacrifice himself for the art. He sacrificed two vulnerable actresses for his own ego and his own twisted gratification. He draped his own real-world deviance in the prestigious intellectual clothing of American method acting. The industry applauded the outfit. The critics wrote essays analyzing the fabric. Everyone deliberately ignored the actual crime happening underneath it. The myth of the tortured actor allowed a powerful man to commit an assault in broad daylight, and the world called it a masterpiece. The cameras eventually powered down, the heavy production lights switched off. The film crew packed their equipment into trucks and left the New York street. Harvey Keitel walked away from the vehicle, retreated to his private trailer, and eventually collected his studio paycheck. But the young women sitting in the front seats of that car did not possess the luxury of walking away. They remained trapped in the psychological aftermath of that night. We must direct our focus entirely toward the immediate targets of this hostility. The primary victims in that vehicle retreated into silence. Regarding the trauma of that specific shoot, they did not hire publicists. They did not attempt to capitalize on their connection to a major Hollywood scandal for media attention. Their silence provides the most devastating, heartbreaking commentary on the entire event. It forces us to confront the exact nature of the professional trap they endured. This incident exposes a brutal, unforgiving power dynamic central to the American labor system. These actresses occupied a highly vulnerable position in the economic hierarchy of the 1990s. They functioned as working-class talent fighting for screen time. They exchanged their physical presence for a standard hourly wage. They possessed zero financial safety net. They possessed no influence within the machinery of the entertainment industry. Their livelihood, their ability to secure future roles and build a career depended entirely on maintaining a reputation as compliant, easy to work with talent. Keitel occupied the peak of that same hierarchy. He commanded millions of dollars. He possessed global fame. He wielded the power to ruin their reputations with a single phone call. He held financial, professional, and social dominance over their existence on that set. A working actor must establish a baseline of trust with their scene partners to function safely. They enter a set daily relying on an unspoken contract of professional safety. They trust the leading man not to violate that boundary. They trust the director to act as a protector. Keitel and Ferrara obliterated that contract on a public street. The psychological collision of expectation versus reality is staggering to comprehend. These actresses arrived at the film set that evening, anticipating an intense but choreographed acting sequence. They expected to perform a standard dramatic task. Instead, they found themselves locked inside a vehicle. They found the powerful leading man standing mere inches from their faces. He exposed his genitals. He masturbated. He screamed graphic, violent, degrading sexual demands through the open window. The human brain struggles to process this level of sudden, extreme betrayal. The mind cannot easily reconcile the identity of the respected veteran actor with the identity of the unhinged sexual aggressor. The sudden violation fractures reality. It induces sheer, uncontrollable biological panic. We must analyze the agonizing, impossible decision they faced in that confined space. Their biological survival instinct demanded immediate escape, but their crushing financial and professional reality paralyzed their physical bodies. Look at the physical parameters of the trap. The car operated as a steel cage. The heavy production lights surround the vehicle, blinding the occupants. If they open the car door and run into the street, they disrupt a major film production. They ruin an expensive camera take. They draw the anger of the entire crew. But more crucially, they anger the director and the star. Fleeing the scene guarantees their immediate termination. They instantly lose their paycheck. They risk being blacklisted by a wealthy, vindictive Hollywood network. Keitel placed them in an inescapable vice. He leveraged their vulnerability. He forced them to choose between enduring a graphic sexual ambush on camera or facing immediate professional ruin. They chose to endure. They kept their eyes open. They absorbed the visual trauma because the American capitalist structure offered them zero viable alternatives. Their paralysis was not consent. Their paralysis was a survival tactic. The ordeal did not conclude when the director finally yelled, "Cut." The production ended, but the shadow of that night remained intact. The psychological torture escalated during the film's release. They had to watch the movie premiere to global acclaim. They had to walk past movie posters advertising the very project that exploited them. They had to carry the silent, toxic, suffocating knowledge of what truly happened behind the scenes. The harassment contaminated their professional history. Their resumes transformed into a constant psychological minefield. They had to smile at industry events and pretend the ambush was just method acting to survive in the business. The trauma of the film set followed them directly back to their source of survival. They were held hostage by the film's success. The devastation of this event extends outward, permanently infecting the viewing public. Bad Lieutenant maintains a notorious reputation within cinema history. It is universally categorized as a profoundly difficult, disturbing watch. The film carries a heavy radioactive frequency. Audience reactions rarely include words like enjoyment, entertainment, or satisfaction. The response is almost exclusively characterized by deep, lingering psychological distress. The film operates less like a movie and more like a traumatic endurance test for the viewer. Audiences sit in darkened, isolated theaters or their private living rooms. They watch the traffic stop sequence unfold. They witness the sudden physical exposure. They hear the humiliating demands echoing from the speakers. Most importantly, they observe the sheer, unfiltered panic on the faces of the young women. The viewer absorbs the trauma secondhand. The film provides no comfortable cinematic distance. The camera placement forces the audience into the vehicle, right alongside the victims. The viewer becomes a captive, involuntary witness to an actual documented assault. This scene leaves a permanent, jagged scar on the psyche of the audience. The explicit footage burrows deeply into the subconscious mind. It surfaces unprompted in quiet moments years later. It generates a lasting, visceral sense of physical unease. Countless viewers report feeling physically unclean after consuming the sequence. They experience nausea. They experience a profound, unsettling sense of moral violation. They realize, usually in a sickening wave of clarity, that they just watched a real crime disguised as a fictional narrative. This realization creates a deep, lingering guilt within the spectator. The audience recognizes they paid money to consume another human being's actual, unsimulated terror. They realize the entertainment industry sold them a ticket to a sexual assault, packaged it in a plastic VHS case, and rented it out for profit. The trauma jumps off the screen and infects the viewer's reality. It destroys the traditional safe escapist function of cinema. It replaces cinematic entertainment with a psychological disturbance. The viewer becomes an unwilling accomplice. Every time someone presses play on that specific scene, the assault happens again. The violation is repeated on a continuous global loop. The film operates as a viral agent, transmitting the horror of that 1992 New York production set directly into the minds of the public for decades. It forces the audience to carry the weight of a crime they could not stop. The agonizing silence of the traumatized actresses and the enduring sickened distress of the global audience stand as the true permanent legacy of Harvey Keitel's actions. The film did not capture art, it captured destruction. It left a trail of psychological wreckage that no amount of critical praise can ever erase. The American entertainment machine possesses a highly effective mechanism for sanitizing depravity. It utilizes a highly coveted cinematic label, the cult classic. The industry applies this label to films considered too extreme, too weird, or too transgressive for general audiences. A cult classic typically defines a movie that failed at the mainstream box office but gained a passionate underground following over time. Cult status grants a piece of media cultural immunity. It transforms a standard movie into a sacred, untouchable object. Fans defend the work fiercely. Independent theaters organize midnight screenings. Critics write long, retrospective essays analyzing its misunderstood brilliance every single decade. The film never dies. It achieves a bulletproof immortality. Bad Lieutenant secured this exact status. It sits near the absolute top of the 1990s independent film canon. We must interrogate the gatekeepers who handed this film its cultural immortality. The film critics of the early 1990s dictated the cultural conversation. They held the power to destroy a film or elevate it to masterpiece status. This critical demographic consisted almost entirely of older men. They wielded massive, unchecked influence over the success or failure of independent cinema. These men watched the physical exposure. They watched the verbal ambush. They witnessed the sheer panic on the faces of the young women. They did not see a workplace violation. They did not recognize an abuse of power. They saw an intellectual exploration of the human condition. They intellectualized the abuse. They draped an academic cloak over a raw act of sexual harassment. The critical establishment latched onto the core, scripted themes of the screenplay. The movie supposedly explores the deep, agonizing weight of Catholic guilt. The narrative follows a corrupt, irredeemable police officer desperately seeking spiritual forgiveness. The critics praised Keitel for perfectly embodying this theological struggle. They wrote thousands of words, analyzing the religious symbolism of a man hitting rock bottom and crying out for salvation. The irony of this critical analysis is suffocating. The film preaches about the heavy burden of sin. It demands the audience contemplate the difficult path to divine redemption. Yet, the production itself committed actual, unforgivable sins against vulnerable working-class women to capture that narrative. The critics deliberately ignored the real-world victims to praise the fictional perpetrator's spiritual journey. They granted the character grace while offering the victims absolute silence. This critical reaction exposes the massive moral vacuum operating within the American independent film scene. The indie label functions as a powerful, impenetrable shield against ethical accountability. Mainstream Hollywood studios operate under strict corporate scrutiny. If a major studio releases a film containing unsimulated sexual harassment, the corporate board faces massive lawsuits. The stock price plummets. The executives face termination. Independent cinema operates under a highly toxic set of rules. The lack of corporate oversight translates directly into a lack of moral boundaries. The industry actively rewards independent films for breaking the rules of basic decency. The transgression becomes the primary selling point. The critics confuse cruelty with artistic bravery. They operate under a flawed, dangerous philosophy. If a film makes the audience profoundly uncomfortable, it automatically qualifies as a cinematic masterpiece. They mistake a biological trauma response for profound artistic provocation. They built a system where the value of the art is directly proportional to the amount of human suffering required to produce it. To fully understand the toxicity of Bad Lieutenant, we must look at an immediate historical contrast. We must examine the concept of the male gaze. Bad Lieutenant was directed through an inherently aggressive, predatory male lens. The camera weaponizes the male body to dominate and humiliate the female subjects. The critics celebrated this type of aggressive dominance as brave. Exactly 1 year later, in 1993, Harvey Keitel starred in a radically different film called The Piano. The film was directed by a woman, Jane Campion. The script required Keitel to perform fully nude. He exposed his entire body on camera. However, Under the direction of a woman, the nudity served a completely different purpose. It was not used as a weapon. It was not used to terrorize a female co-star. The exposure in the piano communicated vulnerability, connection, and deep respect. Campion proved that a male actor can strip away every physical barrier without stripping away the dignity of his scene partner. The piano proves that Keitel possessed the capacity to perform vulnerable, respectful art. It proves that the aggression in Bad Lieutenant was not a necessary acting technique. It was a conscious, deliberate choice. Keitel and his director chose violence. They chose degradation. The male-dominated critical establishment ignored this glaring contrast. They preferred the violent, unhinged version of Keitel over the vulnerable, directed one. They validated the predatory male gaze and dismissed the necessity of mutual respect on a film set. Time usually exposes the truth. Time usually dismantles abusive legacies and corrects historical records. Bad Lieutenant defied this natural correction. The passage of time only strengthened its cultural armor. The cult classic label acted as a preservative. Film festivals continue to program the movie for special events. Art house theaters project the film onto massive screens to celebrate its various anniversaries. Respected entertainment publications routinely include it in lists of the greatest, most essential independent films ever made. Every single screening actively renews the abuse. Every single retrospective essay validates the transgression. Every single commemorative Blu-ray release generates profit from a documented sexual assault. The system continuously breathes life into a film built on a foundation of human degradation. The industry makes a conscious, daily choice to preserve the physical artifact while discarding the human cost required to create it. They sweep the trauma under the rug to keep the poster on the wall. This enduring worship forces a brutal confrontation with our own cultural priorities. Why does the American film industry fiercely protect the legacy of an abuser while erasing the names of the victims? Why does the critical establishment grant moral amnesty to male actors under the guise of raw, artistic genius? Does a gripping performance justify the destruction of a safe working environment? Does a compelling cinematic narrative outweigh the basic human rights of the supporting actresses? The industry consistently demands that the public separate the art from the artist. This demand is a trap. It is a manufactured philosophical argument designed to protect the financial investments of the studio system. It is designed to keep the revenue streams flowing regardless of the creator's crimes. We cannot separate the art from the artist when the art itself is the actual documented record of the abuse. You cannot detach the creator from the creation when the creation is just a high-definition recording of the creator committing a crime. The footage is the offense. The movie is the primary evidence. The continued veneration of Bad Lieutenant represents a massive institutional failure. It proves that the film industry, the critics, and the devoted fans value a piece of celluloid significantly more than the psychological safety of working women. The cult classic label does not elevate the movie into the realm of high art. It indicts the culture that applies it. The label proves that modern society remains perfectly willing to consume, celebrate, and aggressively monetize sickness, as long as that sickness carries a prestigious, edgy artistic reputation. The movie does not stand as a testament to fearless, uncompromising filmmaking. It stands as a glowing monument to the hypocrisy of the critical establishment. The critics sanctified an active crime scene. They called a predator a visionary. They renamed sexual harassment as method acting. They turned a nightmare into a highly profitable cult phenomenon. They built a religion around a violation, and they still expect the public to bow down and applaud. Stripping away the catastrophic, unethical mechanics of the production leaves behind a deeply complicated visual artifact. Separating the crimes committed behind the camera from the final images projected onto the theater screen creates an agonizing viewing experience. Analyzing Harvey Keitel's physical performance in pure isolation forces a profoundly uncomfortable realization. The footage stands as an undeniable, haunting cinematic achievement. It represents a brutal, visceral masterpiece of raw human suffering captured perfectly on celluloid. Keitel did not simply portray a corrupt New York police officer. He embodied the suffocating bottom of human existence. The script demanded a highly challenging protagonist. The American cinema landscape relies heavily on the archetype of the anti-hero. Audiences are traditionally drawn to flawed, dangerous men fighting corrupt external systems. They love the rogue detective who breaks the rules to achieve a noble justice. Keitel shattered that conventional mold entirely. His character is not a charismatic rebel fighting a broken police department. He possesses no hidden nobility. He is fighting the systemic failure of his own soul. He is a man drowning in severe chemical addiction, consumed entirely by his own vice and horrifyingly aware of his own rapid, unstoppable descent into hell. The physical execution of this descent remains staggering to witness. Hollywood leading men typically manage their visual image with meticulous care. They protect their lighting setups. They ensure camera angles project strength, vitality, and desirability. Keitel discarded every single protocol of cinematic vanity. He allowed the heavy, unforgiving camera lenses to capture his physical body in a state of unfiltered degradation. His skin registers on film with a sickly, gray, poisoned pallor. The deep lines on his face look carved by actual exhaustion rather than applied by a makeup department. His physical movements lack the choreographed grace of a trained actor. He moves with a heavy, erratic, deeply fatigued stagger. He carries the literal physical weight of severe dependency in every single frame of the movie. He does not simulate intoxication through practiced theatrical tics. He exists entirely within the suffocating center of it. The emotional frequency radiating from the screen proves even more disturbing than the physical decay. Keitel projects a terrifying, constantly shifting duality that keeps the audience in a state of perpetual anxiety. He portrays a predator capable of extreme, sudden, unprovoked violence, while simultaneously radiating a pathetic, crippling, almost childlike vulnerability. He is a monster desperately crying out for spiritual absolution. The narrative dictates an agonizing religious arc. The corrupt lieutenant investigates a horrific violent crime committed against a nun in a church. This investigation acts as a brutal psychological mirror, triggering a delayed crisis of faith within the detective. He is forced to confront the concept of pure, unadulterated grace while standing knee-deep in his own filth. Keitel navigates this spiritual collapse with a terrifying, unblinking authenticity. The film contains sequences of profound desperation that defy standard acting critiques. Keitel delivers scenes where he physically collapses under the crushing invisible weight of his accumulated guilt. He crawls on the floor of a cathedral. He wails with a guttural, animalistic grief that shakes the audio microphones. He screams violently at unseen hallucinations of religious figures. He demands forgiveness from a God he no longer understands, begging for a redemption he actively knows he does not deserve. The psychological pain projecting from the screen is thick, palpable, and undeniable. The audience can physically feel the psychic weight of a human being, realizing their entire existence has devolved into a toxic, irredeemable wasteland. The viewer is forced to sit silently in the dark and watch a man desperately trying to claw his bare hands out of a grave he spent his entire adult life digging for himself. It transcends acting and becomes a real-time documentation of a soul fracturing. This dynamic creates the central, agonizing paradox of the entire film. The performance is universally considered one of the most realistic, uncompromising, and brutal depictions of addiction and spiritual decay in the history of American cinema. Film historians dedicate entire chapters to analyzing its impact. Professional acting students study the minute physical choices, the unpredictable vocal inflections, and the terrifying dead-eyed contact he makes with the lens. The performance receives universal enduring praise for its unflinching, terrifying honesty. The performance achieves this legendary honesty because it crosses the line into a terrifying reality. The erratic, explosive energy captured on film did not originate from traditional theatrical boundaries. The performance achieved absolute realism, specifically because the man standing in front of the lens was leveraging an environment devoid of rules. The camera did not capture a brilliant, carefully calibrated simulation. The camera captured a man willing to inflict real trauma on others to achieve his aesthetic goals. The artistic brilliance of the final cut is permanently tied to the ethical destruction of the set. The grit, the rawness, the deeply uncomfortable authenticity that critics praise so highly stem directly from Keitel's willingness to ambush his co-stars. He utilized his untreated, unchecked impulses as the primary combustible fuel for the fictional character. He did not build a performance block by block in a safe rehearsal room. He allowed his own personal chaos, his own real-world disregard for consent, to bleed directly onto the 35mm negative. This reality forces a profound, unresolved tension upon the viewer. You are watching a truly great, historically significant piece of cinematic acting. You are witnessing a level of emotional commitment and physical surrender that most professional actors never achieve in a lifetime of trying. You feel the profound, aching sorrow of the fictional character. You feel the crushing weight of his cinematic sins. You recognize the undeniable, towering, artistic value of the sequence playing out before you. But that artistic value remains dependent on the personal, real-world exploitation of the women delivering the reactions. The cinematic masterpiece grew directly out of a profound, literal, moral swamp. The film forces the audience to confront a difficult, ugly reality about the exact nature of great art. Society prefers to believe that masterpieces originate from disciplined, healthy, highly professional environments. People want to believe that great acting is a safe, controlled magic trick. Bad Lieutenant shatters that comforting illusion permanently. Sometimes the most powerful, resonant, and enduring cinematic moments do not come from a place of safety or technique. Sometimes the most haunting, iconic images ever committed to film are born directly from chaos, severe instability, and genuine, unsimulated human suffering. Keitel's performance stands as a towering, permanent monument to that specific dark reality. It remains a brilliant, unforgettable cinematic achievement, and it remains an absolute tragedy that it exists, but the catastrophic moral failure on this set does not end with the leading man. To comprehend the absolute ruthlessness of the director, we must look elsewhere. We must examine the tragic presence of Zoe Lund. Lund was a brilliant but deeply troubled figure in the New York indie art scene. She actually co-wrote the screenplay for Bad Lieutenant. She also acted in the film, playing the woman who prepares and injects Keitel's character with heroin. But this was not merely a theatrical performance. Lund battled a severe real-life heroin addiction. Industry insiders and set reports heavily suggest that the drug use captured on screen was dangerously authentic. Director Abel Ferrara did not just hire an actress to play an addict. He placed a camera in front of a vulnerable woman fighting a lethal battle and filmed her active disease. He leveraged her illness for cinematic atmosphere. Tragically, she passed away a few years later from heart failure directly related to her substance abuse. Ferrara did not intervene during production. He did not offer a safe harbor or demand rehabilitation. He pointed the lens at a dying woman and framed it as a gritty artistic choice. This proves that the exploitation on this set was not an isolated incident involving two background extras in a car. It was a systemic, calculated directorial strategy. The director treated actual human self-destruction and literal life or death struggles as a free special effect. Furthermore, the studio's handling of the final cut exposes another layer of institutional rot. Bad Lieutenant received the dreaded NC-17 rating from the censorship board. Historically, an NC-17 rating served as a commercial death sentence. It prevented mainstream theaters from screening the movie, but the producers did not edit the film to secure a standard profitable rating. They did not cut the unsimulated sexual harassment or the authentic drug use. Instead, they manipulated the restriction. The marketing department wore the NC-17 rating like a badge of honor. They promoted the film precisely because it contained unwatchable taboo content. They used the trauma of the supporting actresses as a marketing gimmick. The theatrical posters boasted about the film's shocking, uncompromising brutality. They sold tickets by promising the audience a glimpse into forbidden, unregulated depravity. The American capitalist machine looked at a documented workplace assault, looked at the real-life spiral of its cast, and figured out how to monetize the controversy. They turned a hostile work environment into a highly profitable, edgy brand. This proves that the studio executives were not innocent bystanders. They were active accomplices who realized that raw human suffering, when packaged correctly, sells incredibly well. The final legacy of this production is not the visceral acting or the gritty, independent aesthetic. The ultimate legacy is the permanent destruction of the boundary separating professional fiction from a real-world violation. For decades, the American film industry has operated on a highly toxic, deeply ingrained lie. The system sold the public the dangerous idea that absolute cinematic authenticity demands a literal human sacrifice. The studio executives and the critical establishment claimed that pushing a performance to the absolute limit naturally requires breaking a few moral rules. But raw authenticity is never a valid excuse for human humiliation. You do not need to shatter the psychological dignity of your coworkers to capture a great frame of film. True, enduring art does not require the non-consensual degradation of the vulnerable. A compelling fictional narrative does not magically erase a documented workplace crime. Yet, the Hollywood establishment spent an entire century building a massive protective mythology around volatile, dangerous men. They canonized actors and directors who mistreated their subordinates on a daily basis. They protected these specific predators with prestigious labels, calling them tortured geniuses, method actors, or uncompromising visionaries. They built an entire economic system specifically designed to forgive the worst male behavior, provided the box office returns were high and the critical reviews were strong. This specific movie stands as the undeniable proof that the aggressive pursuit of unfiltered art can easily operate as a perfect cover for real-world predation. A piece of media born directly from the exploitation and terrorization of working-class women cannot simply be consumed as harmless entertainment. Society has to fundamentally change how it evaluates American cinema. The era of granting moral amnesty to powerful men under the guise of artistic brilliance must come to an immediate, permanent end. We must stop pretending that a hostile, dangerous set is just the necessary price of a cinematic masterpiece. We must stop sanctifying men who use their elite status to crush the people standing beneath them. A performance, no matter how iconic, is ultimately just a job. A film production is ultimately just a standard workplace governed by laws. The basic respect for human life, legal consent, and psychological dignity must always outweigh the selfish pursuit of a shocking cinematic moment. When the director yells "cut," the cameras stop rolling, but the trauma for these actresses does not. What we have just seen is proof of a toxic power dynamic, where art becomes a shield for abuse, and silence is bought with fame. It is time for the truth to be heard. What are your thoughts on this dark reality? Leave a comment below. Don't forget to subscribe to Actor Secrets as we continue to expose the dark side of Hollywood. Thanks for watching.